And so I had this box, and I walked into the front door. Christy's holding Zach, and she says, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "Well, I just got laid off." And she said, "What?" And I mean, it was an absolutely devastating blow to us in the history of us. It was one of those things that you never would think would happen, and it happened. And so we had to begin trying to figure things out. We had a little bit of a savings account going on, so we're tapping into that just to kind of survive and pay the bills. And I just would get up every day and I would go out looking for a job, and nobody was hiring, and it was very frustrating. And then I'd get up the next day and iron my shirt and put on my shirt, and take my resume and just go out and keep looking for jobs and keep looking for jobs. And I remember the day that we sat down and we were so discouraged because nothing seemed to be happening. And Christy says, "We are on the verge of our miracle." Amen. And so I took that, and I'm like, in the moment, I'm like, yeah, well, it needs to happen now. This miracle that you're talking about needs to happen right now. And so this was right along the time that God was calling me to become a pastor. And so in the moment, I wasn't seeing transitions that were happening and taking place in my life. What I was seeing was complete disaster. Because all of a sudden, I'm the man of the house, I find myself with no job, and I have a baby to feed and a family to take care of and all the bills that go along with it. But here's what I know now. God was working in that plan, His plan, all along. And I believe that He used my wife Christy that day sitting at our kitchen table with my head in my hands going, what are we going to do? And He spoke through her and He said, "You're on the verge of a miracle. Watch and see what I'm about to do." He had depleted all of my resources. All of them. I couldn't move. I couldn't find a job. I couldn't do anything as hard as I was working. He depleted all of my resources because there was a miracle about to take place and He was going to get the glory for it. So I found this story that you've probably very familiar with in Judges. And if you'll just bear with me for just a second, I'm going to do something on my iPad. I'm going to take this sleeper thing off where it falls asleep every 30 seconds. So,
should have been prepared for this already.
Thank you, Jordan. You're so funny. I could hear his voice. That ringing voice is just, I love you, man. I'm just kidding. Okay, so let's get back to this. So I found this story, Judges chapter 7. Most of you know it, some of you might not, but it's where Gideon is about to defeat the Midianite army. And I love this story because it ties right into this miracle that was about to take place in our own life. And I love it when God uses an old-timey story that's thousands of years old, and He brings it to today and the circumstance that we find ourselves in. You might think, well, those are just old histories. That's just an old history book. Those are old stories. Let me tell you something. The Word of God is alive and active, and it's stories that like this, these things that have happened in the past that God used just come to life in our lives, and we're able to see God for who He is when we look at stories like this, especially when it involves us. Have you ever been inside of a story of your own and then God speaks to you through His Word? It's like, oh my goodness, He's talking to me. He's speaking to me. It's the coolest thing ever to do that and to watch God work and move. So here's the story in Judges chapter 7. And it says this. I'm just going to read here. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is actually Gideon. I don't know how they got the word Gideon out of Jerubbaal, but okay. And all of his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. So here we find this army of 32,000 men, and God says to Gideon, "I need you to go defeat the Midianite army, and I will be glorified by this." So I imagine if I were Gideon, first of all, having the courage to take up and be the general of this army and say, okay, I've got 32,000 men to work with. So I've got to get this platoon, I've got to get this platoon ready. And he probably in his mind starts making things up and how 32,000 men are going to defeat an entire army, the Midianite army. So what God does in the middle of this is crazy. God says, wait a minute. You have too many resources. You have too many resources. So I'm going to take a few of those resources away from you so that when you do defeat the army of Midian, I'll get the glory for it. And so he's like, okay, well, Lord, if that's what you want to do. Now, you have to understand, this requires a lot of obedience from Gideon. I don't know, because in the Word he says, pretty much he just keeps going like, okay, God, if that's what you want, that's fine. I would be like, whoa, wait a minute. I need these resources. I need these resources, and I am going to have to use every one of these men, every one of these resources, so that I can defeat this army that you've asked me to defeat. You've called me to this. So I'm going to need every resource that I can get my hands on to do what you've called me to do. And God says, no, I'm going to take some of those resources away from you. Now, as a pastor, that speaks volumes, because you come to a point in your life, in ministry, or even in your own life and in your own job, in your own circumstances, where you begin to depend on your own resources. You begin, and we would never say this out loud. We would never say, oh, I depend on my own resources, or I don't depend on my own resources because I know that God has this. I don't know how many times I've said that, but when I am backed into a situation where there is nothing left, when all of my resources are depleted, I freak out. And I think that all of us would probably feel the same way. When we have nothing left, we have to have our resources. We have to say to God, I can do this job that you've asked me to do, but I'm going to need some resources for it. And maybe there's a family situation in your life. Maybe it's a financial situation in your life. Maybe it's a marriage, that's being worked on. Maybe it's a child that has gone astray in your life. Whatever the situation is, you can say to God, God, I know you're going to get through this. You're going to get me through this, but I'm going to need all of my resources to do it. And see, what that does is it robs God of the glory. When your miracle takes place, it robs Him of His glory. And we can start to depend on our own resources. We can start to say, well, at least I'm gifted in this, or at least I'm qualified here, or this or that. And we start naming off of the resources that we actually have. And then God says, no, I'm going to shed some of those resources away. And I look at this in seasons of life. I was looking at this passage where God says, now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left while 10,000 remain. So 32,000, 22 is wiped out, he's got 10,000. I believe there has been a time in my life where my ego would have said, I've got 32,000 widgets, or whatever you want to call it, of resources. I've got this going for me. I've got that going for me. I've got all of these things that are going for me. And then somewhere in the stage of a season in my life, God says, now you got too many resources. This isn't really about you. So He carves some of those resources out. And when He begins carving out the resources, let me tell you something, that is so painful. That is so painful when God starts taking your resources away from you. You know why? Because we hold on to them. We're like, I can't survive if I don't have these resources. I can't survive if I don't have this or that or this job or that money in the bank or this child making sure that everything's fine or this marriage, all of these things. And the resources begin to deplete and we say to God, wait a minute, I don't like this. I don't like the fact that you're taking this away from me. And God's saying, I have to take it away from you. It's part of your story. It's part of your story, and you're going to get to a place where you realize that I am going to get the glory for your story. Amen. So Gideon says, okay, sure, why not? Let's do it. So he goes on to say, but the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. So this season of your life, and God has ripped out resources that you thought you had or that you thought you could stand on, and He's ripped them away from you, and you're saying to yourself at this point, well, at least I got some of my resources left. At least I've got some of my own capabilities and strength left to get through this. And then God says, nah, guess what? I'm going to deplete even more of your resources. The Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. And then Gideon took the men down to the water. And I really wish I could read these slides a little bit better. Oh, there we go. I just changed it just like that. So Gideon took the men down to the water. And I put obedience right there. Because that had to take some obedience. Where God says, I give you 32,000. No, that's too many. And He takes how many away? 22. So He's got 10. And then He says, you still have too many men. So Gideon took the men down to the water. That is complete obedience. God is ripping out the resources out from underneath Gideon's feet. And Gideon's saying, okay, if that's what you feel like I need to do, God, that's fine. Now, I don't know if I would be that obedient. I think I would go kicking and screaming a little bit more. But then he says, then the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues on, as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. Then the Lord said to Gideon, come on. I hate this. I'm sorry, y'all. Trying to be all fancy and nothing works.
Losing your resource.
Woo! Zach Arnold is in the house, ladies and gentlemen. Zach Arnold is here. Okay, so verse 5, verse whatever. The Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hand. With 300. So he takes this army from 32,000 to 10,000 to 300. I mean, that to me is like, whoa, wait a minute. You've taken everything away from me, almost everything away from me. And God says, now I can do my work. And He goes on to say that the 3 companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars. This is the whole story if you want to read it in Judges 7. He says, blew the trumpet and smashed the jars, grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow. They shouted a sword for the Lord and for Gideon, while each man held his position around the camp. And all of the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. When the 300 trumpets, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other and their swords, with their swords. The army fled to Beth Shittah towards Zaruru as far as the border of Abel Malala near Tabbathah. Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and all of Manasseh were called out, and they pursued the Midianites. So God took 32,000, says, no, that's not enough. Removed some of the resources, got him down to 10,000, and God says, no, that's still too many. And He says, okay, I'm going to pull almost all of your resources out, and I'm going to sit there, and I'm going to give you 300 men, and you're going to go out and accomplish what I've asked you to do with very, very limited resources. Now, this is what I want to share with you today that I believe God is sharing with me. He will deplete your resources so that He gets the glory when your miracle happens. Now, I don't know where you are. I don't know what situation you might find yourself in today. But I can promise you, sometimes we look at it and we go, man, Satan's really attacking me. Okay? And I'm not saying that our enemy does not attack. Ephesians is very clear of the fact that he attacks. But what if this is a season in your life where God is removing resources away from your life, so that when your miracle happens, He's the one that gets the glory for it? Because if you have your resources left and you feel like you have come through this fire, you can say on the other end of your fire, of your trial, of your season, your tribulation, go, man, that was just God. That was God, I'm telling you. There's one thing to say that, and then there's another thing to know that. When you come out on the other end of a trial and a tribulation, when you've had no resources to count on, no resources to back you up, and you get to the end of that, you know God did that for you. You don't just say it. It's not a second-hand account. It's an actual witness testimony that God did what He said He was going to do when your miracle happens. So when Christy and I found ourselves at that table, we were also in the process of trying to move to Dothan, Alabama, so I could go to seminary. So all of this was going on. I had taken a trip down to Dothan, and I drove around the circle with my resume, and we were thinking, this is what we were thinking. I still had some resources left. So, well, I'm pretty good in sales, and I got this really cool resume, so I'm just going to go around the circle and pass out my resume to people. And so I did, and I went around and I went to car dealerships, I went to anywhere I could find and passed out my resume. And every one of them said, thank you for applying and appreciate you coming in here and showing initiative, but we just don't have anything available for you. Now, I was in the telecommunications business beforehand in sales. And I had a friend of mine that was kind of high up in the ranks in this company that I worked with when I first graduated college. And so I was completely at the end of my resources, had gone and visited the seminary, had tried to find a job in Dothan, Alabama, and nothing. But I knew that's where God was taking us. I knew it. And then I remember going down into our basement and just 4 or 5 hours with God, just wrestling with God. What are you doing? Why are we in this position? We have no money left. We have no resources left. Matter of fact, we had given a missionary $100 one Sunday night because I felt that's what God had me to do. I'm down in the basement or something, and Christy comes down and she's like, hey, you know that $100 you have? She's like, we have no money in your bank account. I need that $100 because Zach needs diapers. I'm like, well, I got some bad news for you. So I just gave that away because I felt like that's what God called me to do. And He said to give that money to that missionary, and she's like, well, we don't have any money for diapers. I got in my car, I drove down to the church parking lot, and I was sitting in the church parking lot just about to go in and ask for my money back. I'm not kidding. I had given this money to God, and I was going to go take it back because I needed diapers for Zach. I'm sitting in the parking lot, and I promise you, I'm sitting there and going, this is so wrong. This is so wrong. I can't believe that I'm at this point in my life. And I don't know what you believe and how God speaks to you, but just this calm came over me, and He said, check your mailbox. That's just what popped into my head. So I got in the car and I took off, and I went to the mailbox and I opened it up, and it was, we get, with our insurance company, we get once a year, and we never know when it's coming, a dividend check back from the insurance policy. I opened my mailbox, and there was an $84 check sitting in the mailbox, and God says, go get your diapers for your son. It gets so much better than that. And so I went and got diapers and all of that. And so God was like just meeting every need right after the other. Completely broke. We knew we were supposed to come down to this area. We knew it. We had prayed about it. We talked about it. And so once again, Christy and I having a conversation. She says, I just believe we're on the verge of a miracle. And I'm going to tell you something. It wasn't like, this whole, well, I believe we're on the verge of a miracle, like very calm. It was more like, we're on the verge of a miracle. I hope we're on the verge of a miracle. And Christy's like, we are. I feel it. I feel we're on the verge of a miracle. She says, make one more phone call to that guy that that you used to know back in the business years ago. I said, all right, I'll do it. So I called him up and I said, hey, Tim, this is Tyler. He's like, oh yeah, I hadn't heard from you in a while. What's going on? I'm like, man, I'm really struggling right now and I need a job. And I don't know, I don't know if you have anything. I don't even know what you're doing now. You could be retired for all I know. He goes, oh no, I'm with this company in Alabama now. So I'm the general manager of the Alabama region. I'm like, oh, that's great, man. That's awesome. I said, you wouldn't happen to have anything going on that I could, be a part of? And he's like, actually, I do. Now, this was about 2 weeks after I got back from Dothan, looking and getting nothing there. He said, I do, but I don't. Where are you at now? I said, I'm in Toccoa, Georgia. He said, well, I don't know if you're going to want to do this, but I have a position open down in Dothan, Alabama, as a salesperson for this company that I'm with, if you're interested. Our resources were completely depleted. I didn't even have enough money to buy diapers for my son, and God provided. We took another step without any resources, and God took us from where we were and defeated the enemy that was trying to take us down and brought us to the promised land of Dothan, Alabama. Because we knew that's where we were supposed to go. And he had one job left. One. And it was what I used to do. And he calls me back, and I hang up the phone. Christy and I are going nuts. We're crying. We're excited. We're shouting, laughing, screaming, kicking Zach around. It was like. And then he calls me back the next day. He said, hey, I've talked to my boss, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you the executive package on this. So we're going to pay for all of your whole move down there, 6 months in an apartment. 6 months in an apartment, food stipend, we'll do your laundry, all of this. A furnished apartment. So within a matter of 2 weeks, there's this huge truck in front of our yard tagging and loading our furniture up. We go down and find an apartment, own the company, because we had no money left. We had nothing. And we found ourselves in an furnished apartment for 6 months, and they did all the moving, and they packed it up, and they put it back out in the apartment, and all of this was going on, and all we could say was, "Yep, we were on the verge of a miracle." So I'll say this, and I want you to understand this and put this in your heart with all the confidence that you can. When you feel like your resources are depleted, then God is on the verge of bringing Himself glory when He brings you your miracle. Let's pray. Father, thank You for this time. Thank You for this message. Bless this, Lord. Let us encourage our hearts with the fact that You are an on-time God, that You will take everything away from us so that You can bring it back in Your timing so that You will be glorified. So, Father, let us not lose heart. Let us not grow weary in doing good. Let us not forget that You are in absolute 100% control of every step, every breath, every heartbeat of our lives, and that You will determine the course laid out before us. You will direct our steps. You will bring the resources when needed. Let us trust You. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Sunday. Yeah, that's it. Take care.